In a world with artificial intelligence, how do we transform education? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez, and this is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and impacts of AI across education. If you'd like to join the conversation, check out the AIeducationconversation.com. Let's jump in. Hey everyone, I hope the week is treating you well. For many of us, using artificial intelligence for the first time, tools like ChatGPT, as an example, can feel like magic. I know I definitely felt that way the first time I used ChatGPT a month after it was released in 2023. I was so excited by the technology and my experience engaging with artificial intelligence that I started this podcast and a learning journey that we've been continuing for a long time now. Just like a talented magician, engaging in a really compelling magic trick, however, not everything is as it appears. I kept thinking about this analogy during my conversation with Tom Mullaney. Tom is an experienced educator who's held multiple teaching and education roles during his career. He's recently settled in as a consultant around educational technology, and he publishes really thoughtful media on his website. I was interested in having a conversation with Tom based on a blog post he actually wrote about, where he talked about one of the most popular AI use cases, which he headlines as talking to the dead. What I mean by this is educators, schools, and organizations who have trained AI chatbots to speak in the voices of folks who may have passed, such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Napoleon, or other notable figures. I personally have noticed that this use case is popping up more in written publications across media and in the most popular AI tools being used today. Most notably, there is a site called character.ai, which consistently is popping up in the top 5 most used AI tools, and actually always wondered why. I appreciated Tom bringing the heat during our conversation and really being clear that we need to stop racing to adopt AI and ensure we are considering the ethics, drawbacks, and implications of mass AI adoption in schools. If you're interested in my other takeaways, check out the companion show notes in the episode description or sign up for the conversation at the AIeducationconversation.com. I share all show notes with my community 12 hours before sharing with my social media networks. If you have any other thoughts on today's episode, you can join the conversation at the AIeducationconversation.com or message me on LinkedIn. Humans at the heart of education. Enjoy the episode. Tom Mullaney, welcome to the AI Education Conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And in the spirit of the question you just asked me, what is your professional journey and how did you end up interested in artificial intelligence?
Okay, so it's kind of two different things. I'll start off with my background. I was a special education teacher for 10 years. I wound up transitioning to middle and high school social studies, started in the South Bronx. I'm originally from New York. My wife is from the Philadelphia area. So most of my teaching career was actually right outside of Philadelphia. We moved down here to North Carolina, where I was an instructional coach, had a little detour to San Francisco Unified School District's district office, came back here in North Carolina, was an instructional coach. And since the onset of the pandemic, I have been a consultant where I work with schools. Sometimes I work with ed tech companies, delivering professional development. So love that stuff. As far as my journey with AI, when it initially came out, I'll be honest with you. So this is a little bias on my side. Chatbots don't really excite me. And then early on, I heard some red flags being raised, things about bias. And as I say in one of my blog posts, I do a lot of stuff with FigJam. It's a collaborative whiteboard. I love that. I think that the Google Docs updates and innovations these last 2-3 years have been really impressive. There's nothing about a word processing program or a collaborative whiteboard that is inherently amplifying bias in any way. And so once I heard that amplifying bias, that's when I said, all right, shut up and listen. And so I really was quiet about this stuff until just now, February 2024. And in that time, I've been listening not to the AI and K-12 conversation. I mean, I've heard it and it's overwhelmingly positive and excited, but I've been listening to the conversations happening in technology, happening amongst professors and linguists and all these people who really know and understand AI. I'm not an AI expert. I'm just someone who looks at it critically and tries to listen to experts. And my thing is, I think we need to understand what this stuff is, what it does, how it works before we really dive into, hey, this is going to be amazing in the classroom. We just don't know enough about it. And I'm trying to educate myself. And as I learn, try to educate others.
Yeah, I think your perspective is really helpful there, and I appreciate you like distinguishing like your professional journey between just your take on AI because I will say that I've noticed a little bit of that as well, where for folks I would say who largely have like more deep educational practitioner backgrounds that I've talked to versus like deep technical backgrounds, I'm noticing that their experiences or even their general like optimism towards like artificial intelligence is a little bit different. Like I've had folks who've come on with more of a technical background even say like things such as like ChatGPT is a glorified autocomplete or saying things like that. And that is just like a very different perspective from what I would say, like if I have a school leader or somebody like that coming on, like how they're entering the conversation, how they're thinking about it in that way. And so I do think it's important to go more into the technical of how these tools work and to amplify some of the perspectives. I think is it sounds like you've been doing as
And
well.
so, can I say, when that person said glorified autocomplete, I've heard one expert say it's spicy autocomplete. That is so accurate. That is so accurate. And that is something that is completely missing, at least in my experience. Okay. Maybe there's folks who are raising attention about this, but it's an autocomplete. It's a text prediction engine as far as large language models. Other forms of AI, I'm using quotes, are, work different. But and then the other thing, I want to say is that, I was recently at a conference and a participant was talking about how the facilitator had a Google form, and this participant was going to use ChatGPT to hack into the Google form. They spent about 10 minutes on it, were not successful, but thought that, 20, 30 minutes, I could probably hack into their Google form using ChatGPT. So there are downsides. So in the K-12 conversation, the downsides are getting like just a passing mention. And in the technology conversation, the downsides are kind of dominating the conversation. And so I think that's a bit of my motivation to be posting as I am now, to kind of bridge that gap a little bit and make it a little bit more nuanced as far as a conversation about AI and K-12.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful, and I'm really excited to dig into the first blog post because I think it's very highly appropriate to the table set that we're doing here. And I will briefly just say that from my perspective, I'm seeing it a little bit differently. I don't know that I would quite say that I'm seeing folks across education like totally optimistic and not necessarily playing the upside. I'm actually more seeing a little bit of like an analysis paralysis, I would say, across like folks in education, where I think generally if you talk to folks about AI, they are maybe like slightly optimistic towards it, but have a lot of concerns about some of the mainstream arguments related to it, such as like the cheating, the academic integrity, those kind of pieces. But I think for the most part, like fundamentally, what I'm noticing is everybody in education, especially in public education, in my networks that I am frequently talk to, I think they're taking the stance of like, let's just kind of wait and see. Like, let's not do anything and let's just kind of see how this plays out a little bit. But I will say that I think you're right that across like the spectrum as a whole in education, you're probably getting a lot of folks who fall across the entire you're getting folks who are like overwhelmingly positive, some who are like super critical and pessimistic because of especially those mainstream arguments around cheating, and then a lot of folks like in between. And so I think some of the pieces you bring up in your blog post today though are really important. And I will say that even in my own learning journey, I've been very susceptible to some of the Eliza effect pieces that you bring up today. And so I will be very honest about even my own experience when we get there in just a second.
And I would just say, you talked about analysis paralysis and let's wait and see. I would ask, if you were maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago, thinking about investing in crypto and NFTs, if you had had analysis paralysis and let's see how this plays out, would that have been a good thing or a bad?
Well, to be honest, I don't know that I would really have thought about like just from my perspective as somebody who isn't I've not always been, like, highly fascinated with
Mm,
tech, nor have I always seen technology as a good thing in education. I would say artificial intelligence and ChatGPT in particular is really the first time where I have been, like, generally more optimistic than I have been, like, negative or at least seen the connection between those tools. So I would say, like, my initial reaction to that would be, I don't even know that I would really see a place for NFTs and cryptos in education as a whole. That would be, like, my initial thought. But then in general, when you ask me about that technology, I would say I'd have more of a negative view towards it personally because like NFTs as an example, when I first heard and like read about NFTs, I kind of thought that those were just like virtual Pokemon cards. Like, that's, like, what I first thought of it as. I'm like, well, in the same way that Pokemon cards go up and down and there's scarcity and then there's not, I would imagine it works similar. And then with crypto, to be honest, I just don't even think I understand enough about crypto and how it works to, I think, have an opinion there.
Right. And so you lost no money. I'm not same here. I didn't invest in any of that stuff and I lost no money. And so I guess the point I'm making here is that sometimes let's wait and see and analysis paralysis is not a bad thing. But okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway,
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you had been, a part of some of these conversations or, thrown money into, I forget the app that it's called, but with the, that tech guy who got in trouble and,
thanks, Sam Bankman
ended
Fried.
up,
Yep.
yeah, yeah, Sam Bankman-Friedman and all that. That to your
See,
point, it's not necessarily a bad thing to just observe, especially when, I think right now there also exists a little bit this sentiment of like when you're reading articles, when you're seeing some places are doing things, it can feel a little bit like there's this get on the train right now or it's about to leave the station moment. And I think overwhelmingly as I'm having conversations with folks, and I'm kind of inferring that you might be in this camp as well, though you haven't actually said it yet. Maybe we haven't hit that moment yet, and we can still be patient. We can still observe. We can still let more of this open up a little bit before we really have to make a big decision about how AI is in education or how AI exists in our
oh,
schools.
absolutely. I think if there's
Yeah.
anything to and part of my thing is I hear people who I consider experts in K-12 saying things about AI that, again, from what I see from the experts, that are just not true. And a lot of it actually fits into the Eliza effect, that personification,
Mm,
that thinking that there's deep intelligence and
mhm,
projecting that. And then the other thing I notice is there's a lot of predictions. And when I hear people say we have to get on the AI tree, we have to be, AI has to take over instruction, a lot of the argument is based on predictions. And what I just would remind folks is that a prediction is not a fact, it's an assumption. And so when we make arguments, let's make them on facts, not assumptions. That's my take on that.
yeah. No, it's helpful. I think we've skirted around it enough. Let's get into
Yes.
your blog post because I really liked it. It really left an impression on me. But just to set the context a little bit here, and I'm going to link the blog post in the chat so that at this point, if folks want to like be able to read it and look at it, we're obviously going to discuss it in some detail today. But in this blog post, you highlighted as the Eliza effect, and you're talking a little bit here about some of the pedagogy, some of the implications around, having AI guest speakers or what teachers should know about this thing called the Eliza effect. And so, that being said, what is the Eliza effect?
Okay.
What does that mean? And, what implications might it have?
All right. So the Eliza effect. There was a computer scientist. His name was Joseph Weizenbaum. And in the 1960s, he created a chatbot that he named Eliza after Eliza Doolittle. And it was a therapy chatbot. So it was meant to be like a therapist, right? And so as he observed people interacting with it, he noticed, and in my blog post, I link a great profile of Weissenbaum from The Guardian. He noticed that it might lead to people to regard computers as possessing powers of judgment and are deserving of credibility. So the Eliza effect was not, that term was not coined by Weissenbaum, but people have coined it to explain that human beings tend to intuit like human characteristics, including trust and judgment and credibility on computers that generate text. Oh, and I was talking to a leader yesterday who said, I don't really understand what the problem with that is. And so my point is, and there's a great quote I use in the blog post from a data scientist at Meta. His name is Colin Fraser. And he says, the technology is designed to trick you, to make you think you're talking to someone who's not actually there. And actually, just that you're even talking to someone. The idea that you're talking to ChatGPT, you may be typing into ChatGPT. ChatGPT is not talking to you in any way, shape, or form. So there's just a lot of misunderstandings. And my point is that we as humans tend to believe what text generating computers tell us. And so when you couple that with the known inaccuracies of these large language models and the known biases of that, to me, that combination can cause all sorts of misunderstandings, can amplify bias. And I looked at it through a strategy that's been suggested of use your Gemini or ChatGPT as a guest speaker in the class, whether it be a deceased historical figure or even a concept. interview the water cycle. And my point is if something happens as you're doing that, and a student and you as the teacher say, "Oh no, it got it wrong," is it really that hard to imagine a student siding with the computer? But ChatGPT said it, right? So that, and especially with the way adults are communicating about how ChatGPT is authoritative, and let's ask ChatGPT, why wouldn't the student say, but ChatGPT said it, right? We're not, I guess overall, what I'm saying is these large language models are not meant to be used in that way where we ask them for authoritative opinions about things. That's just not what they're designed.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, and I will say that when I read what you were talking about with the Eliza effect, and as you described, one of the most popular use cases that we know is happening across education, just in general right now with how people are using this, I would say we know this pretty concretely because there are some studies out there too, which have shown some of the most popular AI tools out there. And, number one tends to always be like ChatGPT or Gemini, some of the big models. But then when you start to look at three, four, five, they tend to be some of these sites that you can create a GPT. And a lot of times the most popular GPTs or, chatbots that folks are creating on there are ones around personalities like, the Napoleon GPT or the Elon Musk GPT or, like the Martin Luther King Jr. GPT. And to your point, there there are some there's a very quick slippery slope here which can happen when this happens because number one you're combining the fact that like we as humans naturally when we don't have a trained eye towards something like this to what I was alluding to earlier, I will say that as somebody who doesn't have a lot of deep experiences in technology, when I was first hearing about ChatGPT, I definitely fell, I think, a little bit. It was very easy for me to think of it that way, or this effect, as you call it, this anthropomorphizing,
Yeah.
saying that right word, but assigning human-like qualities to these things. Initially, because when I was first interacting with GPT, I couldn't help but initially feel like, man, it feels like I'm talking to somebody. But then again, as you continue to play around with the tools, as you continue to educate yourself on what it is, what it's trained to do, which is it's trained to be engaging and persuasive, not always accurate,
Mhm.
right? And you continue to use it very quickly, then you can start to develop your eye to realize there's nothing there. You don't have to be polite. You don't have to say thank you. You don't have to do things that you would normally do when you're communicating via email or written communication with another human because it's not human.
Right.
It is a technology. And but to your point, probably within my first 3 to 4 hours of using ChatGPT when it first came out, I definitely felt some sentiments of that, and I was like, "Oh, yeah," like, it kinda felt if it felt more than just, doing a Google search, but it wasn't quite talking to a human, and so it was this, like, category that I just never experienced before or felt that way, but then I think real quickly when you look under the hood, you realize it's not that, but for many of us, we haven't spent hours upon hours doing it, and so that may be the initial experience that folks have when they're first engaging with these types of tools if they haven't done so before.
Yeah, and you mentioned Martin Luther King, and this is a point I make in the post. So the New York Times did a rundown of the major backers of the AI industry, and they were exclusively male and
Mhm.
majority white. And OpenAI's board exclusively white, or exclusively white and male. And one of their board members, why am I blank? Lawrence Summers, former Treasury Secretary, former president of Harvard, actually said in public that men have more aptitude for science than women. So to me, having a ChatGPT from OpenAI with an all male board voice deceased members of marginalized communities. I mean, I'm sorry. The word problematic is just all over that, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Totally. And I think just for folks who maybe aren't fully understanding like why this is problematic at this point, I will at this point enter in, the recent, outrage that took place around like Google Gemini's like visual model, right? As an example. There's a lot of folks that I've seen across my timeline that are have been frustrated or outraged or they have observed cases where folks are very furious about the way that Gemini, which is, Google's new AI tool, it was allowed to create visual elements just like ChatGPT was. And what they were noticing is that when they were searching terms such as who are the founding fathers and they were searching terms, the visual representation would automatically default to generating peoples of color, even in instances where objectively it was not, right? And there was an outrage to that, and people were frustrated and infuriated by the fact that there was, a lack of accurate representation for who those roles should have been based on like some of the terms that they were looking for, and it was overly compensating for that specific way. But I think my initial response to that is, again, if you need just some examples of how society normally works in the opposite direction, exactly as you're describing, right? Where you can't always visually see it. That is a primary example as to what could also be taking place related to some of these chatbots. When you were saying, hey, this is like actually talking to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and speculating as to what he might have said, maybe based on the fact that it was trained on a couple of articles or speeches he said, but still with parameters and still with algorithms written by a whole bunch of white, likely straight
Mhm.
males, right? And then making assumptions that these are things that he might have actually said when in reality it was not. And so I would just encourage those same folks who were outraged about that visual representation with your eyes because you could see it. This is a similar type of misalignment that is happening on the other end as
Yeah,
well.
and when we talk about using chatbots with kids in the way it's suggested, so the teacher is using Gemini or ChatGPT. The terms of service on Gemini and GPT for kids are extremely restrictive. Kids under 13 are not allowed to use ChatGPT. For kids 13 to 17, it's parental permission is required. So is that like, and I understand there's a data collection component to that that obviously wouldn't happen when a teacher does that. So is that really okay? Like, is that okay? I just think that the terms of service dictate that you wouldn't do that with kids. For 13 to 17, that you wouldn't do that unless you had collected a parental permission slip from each and every student in your room. And then the other thing that I wanted to get into there, oh, as far as Gemini. So Gemini's had a really rough week. And I know there was the whole thing about, there were no Nazis of color. Okay, fine. And yeah, that's absurd. But also, it recently, I think this was Sunday, someone put in a prompt: who had a worse effect on the world, Hitler or Elon Musk's social media posts? And it said, it's hard to say. And so again, like, are we really vesting so much authority and effectiveness in this tool that when there's these very obvious situations, and then someone did it, who's had a worse impact on the world, Hitler or Tom Brady? And again, it's that it's hard to say. I mean, come on, So anyway,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you're getting to, I think, the point that we're reiterating different examples of, which is like there's so much imperfectness to any of these tools because they're based on the subjectivity of humans fundamentally, right? Regardless of which tool it is, there's going to be algorithms, there's going to be parameters that are built into these tools based on the people who are developing them, right? And so in one case it could be comparisons, and obviously, as a society, us not agreeing with how it's responding. In some cases, it could be visual representations. In some cases, it's other ones. But fundamentally, I think it really just strengthens this point that you don't want to take anything that you're receiving from any of these AI tools at face value. You want to make sure that you're doing corroborating. You want to make sure that you're really interrogating what it's giving
so
back to you.
one, that's exactly right. And so two, then why are you going to those tools to get information? There's a lot of stuff out there. I mentioned it on when
Mhm.
I was on Jen Giffin's podcast, and I think I'm going to mention it in an article or a blog post next week. But large language models, which are just predicting the next string of characters based on their pulling it from the training data, is not a search engine. It should not be used for search. It's not designed for that. Don't use it for search.
Yeah. I mean, I think that being said, that probably lends itself to a great question here, which is, so if these AI tools are really not meant to be used to like identify information or to verify information, or you don't want to really use it for that. Do you have any, recommended use case that you would say, like, for educators, for students, even for schools in generals? These are some use cases that really highlight some of the strengths of these tools and can mitigate some of the risks that generally come up with trying to use them as a source for
So
information.
one, I don't know that you mitigate the risks, right? I don't like that's
Mm,
not a thing. Like it's a stochastic model. So I talked to a teacher who said, "Well, I'll run it beforehand." But just because you give put a prompt in on Tuesday and then put that identical prompt in on Wednesday doesn't mean you're going to get the same result. So I'll do it beforehand. I'll make sure everything's great, which is what we typically do when we teach kids. Doesn't help you here. And so as far as large language models, again, you're asking me about using them in the classroom. no teachers of anyone younger than 13 is allowed to use these, right? And then
Mhm.
for 13 and up, I have to get parental permission. And again, how can I say this? It's an autocomplete. If you're a teacher and you have so many standards and so many things that you're responsible for, and you have to test prep the kids and all this, not I'm not saying that test prep is a good thing, but you're asked to do all these things. And now, because we think AI is somehow going to take over society and somehow affect workplace conditions, even though we don't know that, now you as the teacher are responsible for using AI with your students. No, I just disagree. I disagree with that. I think let teachers, principals, administrators, district leaders get together and really dive into what AI is, have conversations like you and I are having now, and then trust teachers who with that real understanding of it, trust teachers who want to innovate and explore with it and take it from there. That's what I would say. Daniel, I know your podcast probably isn't usually like this. I'm not here to tell you about great use cases for AI. I'm here to tell you that I'm thinking critically about it and I'm learning and I want to inject that critical thinking into the discourse about it.
Oh
Hmm.
yeah, totally. No, I'm not expecting this conversation to go anyway. I want it to go
Yeah.
where it goes. And just to clarify, I think my last question, I was not suggesting that we should be thinking about student AI use cases at this point, but I mean, for the adults in the building, right? You have just talked about all of the different roles that you spent in the school. So I know that you get it in terms of the real challenges that schools have and what they're experiencing today. So for those instances where it can be really difficult. Do you see any potential ways that like the adults in the building could be using AI tools to like make their own lives easier, absent of, just like putting it in the hands of student? Or at this point, as you think about like the opportunity costs relative to investing in some of these AI tools versus some of the other things out there, you would actually just you would continue to affirm that like, no, I don't know that at this point in time we should be able to, continue to use this. I think that's more so what I'm trying to
So
ask.
I'm going to give you an answer that kind of skirts the question. To me, what this stirs up for me is solidarity. And what I mean by that is teachers are overwhelmed. They have too much stuff to do. So if you're going to tantalize them with, ChatGPT can generate a quiz for you, or, you know, I understand why teachers would get excited about that. Now, of course, that quiz might be so inaccurate. You have to like edit it and read it with a fine tooth comb before you put it in front of kids. At the same time, kids are using this stuff a lot. Why? Because they're being asked to write essays and things that they have no choice about, they have no consent about. I'll give you an example, Daniel. So let's say, Daniel, I need you to write me an essay talking about the highlights of the Philadelphia vegan takeout scene. And if you don't do it well, you're not good at your job. If you don't do it well, I'm going to label you a failure. So, do I understand why kids would use it in that case? Of course I do. And so, what I'm getting at is that we have a situation where we ask kids to do things that maybe aren't, or at least they don't see as a good use of their time. And we're asking teachers to do things. We're actually asking teachers to do some things that are just not a good use of their time and some things that are just too much. And so I look at it as kind of these systems should be broken down as opposed to putting a band-aid on it with a chat GPT or this AI hack will make your life quicker and easier. That's again, so as I explore this stuff, I think it's so much more critical to put out there real understanding of what AI is as opposed to hype up this app or that app, which I know is happening anyway. So I don't feel like I'm going to add to the discourse by being another person saying, oh, this AI is going to revolutionize your life. No, I want to learn what AI is first before I even really start thinking about that stuff.
Yeah. No, that resonates. I mean, I agree with you. I think, and I think that's something that I would just generally affirm as well is like, I don't currently right now across artificial intelligence see like an end all solution in any of
Hmm.
these tools, right? Like AI in of itself, at least in its current form, right? If we look up 5 years from now, there's a new type of artificial intelligence technology which isn't generative AI and can do all these other things. Maybe the discourse changes and continues to advance further. But for right now, with what I'm seeing and what people are telling me, I mean, I would agree. Like I wouldn't look at any of these one tools and say this is going to be the thing that transforms education in of itself. I think you're absolutely right that coming out of a pandemic, coming out of a system in general that hasn't changed much over the last, 100 years. There continues to be large foundational systematic challenges that the system is experiencing, and no current technological innovation is going to solve that in of itself. We do have to like get under the hood of the system and solve some of the problems that are happening. And I just can't help but also like weigh that with the fact that like the reality is there's still teachers who have to go to like work tomorrow and like serve
Right.
kids, right? There's still principals who have to go in there. And so like in the short term, and also again, recognizing a lot of those people are like my friends, like what can I do to make their life easier in the short term, knowing that they may not be in a position to like just flipping like the whole table on
Right.
fire. You know what I mean? And that may not help happen, for them anytime soon. And so I think it's a hard line to toe, right? Because I totally agree. I think philosophically I agree with what you're saying. And also like I don't want my friends to like be burnt out and exhausted every single day. And if there's a way to like try to navigate some of the good that these tools have to like make their life even just 5% better, like I would, that's like something that I think a lot about. But I think you're right. It's like it's not an easy calculus. It's to think about there. There are some trade-offs, I think, in investing further in tools or not investing further
I
in
think
tools.
that that's fair. And I do think that, how can I say this? This this technology could really be amazing at helping people get through tedious work. And if that's the focus, if that's what we're talking about,
Yeah.
then hey, that's great. What's happening is that we're being told by the makers of these tools that these tools are for creative tasks, things that human beings have
Mm,
been doing since the dawn of time. So that's where there's a little bit of discomfort for me. To me, it's like, wait. We're going to give creativity to devices that don't understand creativity. So anyway, yeah.
yeah. Well, speaking of creativity, I mean, maybe this is a good time to reference
Yep.
another blog that you wrote because this is actually getting more into the weeds of creativity, which is so you talk about this blog really more so from the perspective of like 100% ethical
Mhm.
AI app that you've noticed in that way. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying like you're endorsing it, but that you're noticing that this is an ethical AI app. So first, can you walk me through a little bit of like what are you talking about? What does the app do, and what makes it
Okay.
100%
And so,
ethical?
and I would say, I do endorse this app. I blogged about this app for years. Like this has come up in blog posts of mine. I have no problem saying I endorse this app. And it's AutoDraw from Google. And if you're listening to this, you probably use AutoDraw at some point. AutoDraw is an AI experiment from Google. It's been around for, I think, at least since 2017. It's been around forever. And it is AI. It's from Google. Now, Google has a little bit of a problematic history with AI. And so that's why I mentioned that in the blog post because I couldn't advocate a Google AI app without, and and go to sleep at night without recognizing that unfortunate history. And it's an absolute statement, 100% ethical, but I think it's right. And so my point is that all these AI apps pull from a data set. So that data set could be text, it could be audio, it could be video, it could be images. AutoDraw's case, it's images. And what are the images? Well, you go on the 3-line menu in AutoDraw, you click that, you click artists, and you see all of the icons and images that it trains on. So what is AutoDraw? Basically, it's predictive drawing. I start drawing a circle and it starts thinking, sorry, it starts generating suggestions for what the icon could be. Are you trying to draw planet Earth, a, a donut, a tire? And you can pick whatever icon you want, and then it converts your drawing, your sketch to that icon. And so my point about it being 100% ethical, well, one, sometimes there's ethical concerns about data collection. There's no sign in for AutoDraw. So and you can do it on any device. You don't have to be signed in. You don't get to save your work. You have to download it if you want to use it. But so there's no data collection. So I know sometimes people get concerned about data collection, none of that. But what really makes it ethical to me is that I can look and see every element of the data set. So I see everything in its data set. And the artists, presumably, because they're identified on that page, presumably they consented to that. So we have two things. We have transparency and consent. It's 100% transparency of the data set. It's 100% consent from those who contributed to the data set. No one's stuff was taken for that data set without their consent. And so that to me makes it 100% ethical. And I know that sounds very out of character from what our earlier conversation is, but I think it's right.
Yeah. No, it's helpful. I appreciate the clarifying there. And so just to check my own
Mm.
understanding to make sure that I feel like I understand the pieces you mentioned. So my rough understanding of how some of these generative AI tools work, as you said, is that they are trained off
Mm.
of a data set. And if I'm hearing what you said, because one follow-up question I was curious about is, OpenAI at this point with ChatGPT, they do have like a function you can hit to basically choose whether or not you want your like inputs to be trained on this. But I think if I'm checking my own understanding about what you just said, maybe some of the differences there are like number one, all of the data that they have like theoretically collected up to this point has probably not been exclusively through that. There have been probably other data sources that they have taken leveraged as a part of their models, or other large language models may have done the same. The second is when they give you a response, you don't always get to see exactly where that source is coming from when it produces a response. So is that how you might say that something like this auto draw, like in the transparency piece, distinguishes a little bit from like these larger, AI tools that
Oh,
we're all aware of?
very much so. Especially like a chat GPT, I know it's called open AI, but its transparency is more like chocolate milk, right? It's and they're being sued by they're being sued by New York Times,
Mhm.
Sarah Silverman, a bunch of there's so many lawsuits against them because they're saying, these authors and these big companies are saying, we never consented to this. We never said, hey, you can use our data to train your large language model that's going to make you money. And we don't see a dime of that. So that's a big question. I have no idea how that's going to get decided in the courts. But if these artists and comedians and authors are saying, hey, my data's in there without my consent, then to me, that's a real issue.
Yeah. I mean, I think speaking of trained data as well, I know within that same blog post you included this link that I found fascinating, and it was the first time that I'd heard of it. I think it was called.
It's
Let me
called
see what
Have I Been
the name of
Trained?
that was. Yeah, have I been trained? And you basically had showed how on this link they're essentially showing if data that you might have on the internet somewhere, right? On and really anywhere across the internet might have been used to be trained for like an AI tool. And I mean, do you want to share a little bit of your experience using
Okay.
that AI tool? Or I mean
So
that
this
website,
company
I should
called
say?
Spawning, they actually reached out to me after my tech blog post and they said, hey, we'd love to learn more. And so we just got to talking about them. And uh, ha- have I been trained only works for images. So no text, no audio, no video. And you go to the Have I Been Trained website and you type in either a search term like your name, or you type in your website address, and it will then sh- generate returns, the search results show you the images that are part of, I guess, again, I'm not a computer scientist, but the biggest set of image training data for that AI models use. And so once you see that, you'll see what's already been included in a training data set as far as images. You can't turn back time, but they have a button that says do not train. So moving forward, you can prevent its inclusion in more AI training data sets.
Yeah, and I know that when you had searched I think it
Yes.
was your name, but you found that there were some pieces of content that you've created that were being used to
Yes, so far
train
I
AI
found
models.
at least 2 images from my website, which is a WordPress website. So earlier when I searched tommulaney.com, I don't think anything came up, but these are coming up under tommulaney.files.wordpress.com. So at some point, I am going to go in and see if I can get it to just not train on anything on that website. But for now, I want to just leave it up so people can see it and see how that works. But no, search your name or search your website address and just see what comes up. And you never know, maybe something that you created with is in an AI training model without or training data set without your consent.
When you searched your name and you noticed that, like, did anything come up for you?
Well, so remember, I don't consider myself a creative. I'm not an artist. The image in question that I found on the
Mhm.
second page was actually, it's funny, it's a drawing. I was doing a blog post about quick creativity. I think the blog post is like 2019 or 2020. It's an old post. And I saw it there. And the thing that comes up to me is the artists. So I'll give you an example. week ago, everyone's all excited about Sora, 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 and everyone is.
Mhm.
And I replied to one of my friends in education. I said, I see that. And I just wonder whose stuff was stolen for that. That's really that's what comes up to me. And I think we need to think about that. Like, how does it do that? What is in the data set and whose data is in that did not consent?
No, I mean, it's such a fair point because I will say that, like, I'm also in the camp where when I first saw Sora, I couldn't help but be excited by it. But to your point, like, what I also don't want to happen is I don't want people who have spent their lives dedicated towards artistry, towards being very talented at some of these tools to not be compensated for their hard work. Like, they deserve to be compensated for like their work, and they deserve to get to decide whether or not that they want that to be included in training models. Both of those
I'm happy
things
you
should
said that.
happen.
And the other thing I'll just say about Sora, when I look at Sora, I see screensavers. I see a lack of object permanence. I see ants with four legs. I see,
Hmm.
we really have to get past hype and really look at this stuff, right? I'm sorry, this is not going to replace what you love on YouTube or TV shows or films. If you really think it does, then every director, writer, actor, cinematographer, set designer, costumer of every TV show or movie you've ever watched would like a word with you. Because the idea that that is going to replace video entertainment, again, I'm just going to say, come on now. Like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a helpful caution. The other thing that kinda came up for me when I was thinking about this site you included, what I've been trained and, what I was noticing there is, I have to say, like, when I went through the same process and I didn't have any hits across, like, some of my things, I searched my name, I searched the AI education conversation, but I noticed that I was having, like, a little bit of reaction, and I was kind of almost bracing myself to see a bunch of things related to my training. I think the biggest thing that I was afraid of when I was searching is, like, I'm just, like, really afraid that there's gonna be, like,
Mhm.
pictures of, like, myself, pictures of me with my wife, pictures of me, like, in those things, and that I think was the first thing initially that I had just been afraid of, and I know that there's obviously so many current, like, contexts and things happening across the world related to AI generated content, specifically what folks would call AI deepfakes, and what can be very scary about that process, and some people are using it in a very weaponizing way is that, some of that content you can't put on social media or in spaces right now, pictures of your family, pictures of those things, audio, like, can actually be used to weaponize against you, and I think that was very scary, and that was my reaction or what I was thinking when I was looking, and so, yeah,
I think that's
that's just what came up for
100%
me.
right. And I think that we know that beyond, so obviously some of these AI companies, it's a little problematic, their business practices, but we know that there's just straight up
Mhm.
nefarious actors out there. And what would they do if they had access to a
Yeah.
database like that? And the other thing I'll say is, I am not telling schools and teachers, don't have your kids learn about AI, learn about the ethics of it. Absolutely. What I'm suggesting is maybe they don't have to use chatbots to learn about it. Like maybe there's a lot of resources out there, things that we already do around digital citizenship and online reasoning that maybe we can leverage for evaluating what's going on in AI right now. I think that that's 100% a conversation you should be having with kids. Kids should know about, like, kids should be looking at OpenAI's business practices and the ethical concerns. Of course, they should be evaluating that stuff.
Yeah. I really appreciate that distinguishing point because I think to a question I wanted to ask you about earlier, but I know we've been just digging into it and it slipped my mind and I would love to ask about it now. So related to the Eliza effect, right? Acknowledging that for a lot of folks, maybe our initial reaction with using something like this is naturally we just think there are some human like effects and we have to just like remind ourselves of the technology. We have to remind ourselves of the intention and some of the back end hood. But I could not help but also think about it of like, I'm able to do that pretty quickly because I verify what's happening and then I read a lot of sources to corroborate that. I'm also a 32-year-old man, right? Now you have potentially, as we were talking about before, you have adolescents, you have teenagers, right? Using these tools who haven't had as many
Mhm.
lived
Yep.
experiences as I have, right? And they maybe are having a similar reaction to this. And I think it just worried me a little bit because I think, in so many use cases and I think in talking to a lot of folks and just my own perspective as well is that social media, I think, is proven as like not exactly the same type of like use case as AI, but like a similar use case that we can learn from about how that was just deployed
Mhm.
onto the world and like the impact of that, both like some positive, but also a whole lot of negative. And especially what is done, I think, to our young people, where it is creating those feelings of isolation because the more you're spending these times in virtual spaces, and in some instances, it can actually be doing the opposite of creating, community or helping you feel more connected. It can make you feel more alone, or it can make you feel like everybody around you is like highly successful and you're not, and creating feelings of lesser than in yourself and those types of things. And I just can't help but wonder how relationships might change because of like artificial intelligence or kids using AI, especially if the tools become even more ubiquitous, or how some of the negative impacts just around like that human to human interaction because of some of these tools based on the trajectory we've seen so far with social media and the lack of training, right? Because I think when these tools came out, as you were alluding to in that initial part, there wasn't like this robust social media education that was like launched across schools across the world when this happened. I think some schools may have done a little bit, which was great, maybe mostly grounded in this idea of
Mm.
cyberbullying, but like it kind of ended there. But it feels like there's so much we could probably learn there from this case
I
study.
think, and I say this as a real tech forward person, as someone who really only got excited about teaching when technology came into the picture. I think there's a lot we need to revisit about kids using devices. I don't think the technology is inherently bad. At the same time, if we're just staring at screens all day, every day, and we know that that's a big part of the outside of school experience. See, that actually was my initial thought when 2014, when my principal came to me and said, your eighth and ninth graders are going to have Chromebooks next year as part of a pilot. I said, school feels so dated to me. Why aren't we using technology? So I got real excited about it. And I think 10 years later, we've really reached a point where we know anxiety, depression, uh, loneliness, isolation, and then all this deep fakes, all this silliness. We know there are some issues. So we really, as I'm listening to myself on this, I realize I'm raising a lot of big theoretical concerns that I don't have answers to, but I know that the conversation at least has to start. And I do think a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, has to be are things that have to change about our society or about the rules. And I don't have any ideas really for how to do that. But I think a lot of the stuff with technology is I just we need to revisit it and figure out how to balance and how to make school a good, healthy, happy place, which is a conversation that's bigger than just technology.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I would say maybe just offer a space for you to get grounded for just a second here. I know you've had a robust set of educator experiences throughout your career. So if you were back in the classroom tomorrow and you wanted to just take one step, like one small step you could do to like try to bring some dialogue or conversation around artificial intelligence or technology in general into your classroom, maybe what would be the topic, or
Yeah.
how would you approach doing that?
All right.
Just
So
like
the
what would
funny
be
thing
step one?
is, if I was in the classroom tomorrow and I'm picturing myself in a history classroom in high school, I would use chat.
Mm.
But I wouldn't it wouldn't be chatbots, it would be Google Chat. I did a blog post last year about I don't know if you ever use Google Chat, it has spaces where okay, so
Oh
spaces is
yes.
like
Yeah.
diet
Mhm.
Slack. It's like Slack really stripped down. But
Yeah.
what so in professional settings now, operating in group chats is like all everyone does. So that's a real world skill. So why wouldn't we expose our kids to it? So what I would do is every unit, I'd have kids in groups. I'd create a space for that group. I'd create some sort of common document we're all working out of. And what I'd probably do is create a fig jam that they all could comment on and edit and put stuff on, get messy and get collaborative. So that's what I would that's to me, that's like the start is we're gonna have different groups and maybe probably heterogeneous groups. We're going to work on something collaboratively every unit. We're going to have a space where we communicate about it, where the teacher can drop reminders, all sorts of fun stuff. Now, as far as balancing the technology, I think part of it would definitely be small group conversations. Every day I'm talking to the small groups, or at least I'm giving you all tasks that you have to talk to each other. I had a teacher tell me the other day that students are telling them now, Why do I need to come to class? It's all online. And so if that's happening in your classroom, you need to unpack that and figure out, okay, well, what are we doing in class that they have to be here and is interesting and engaging? Again, this is not an easy thing to do, but that's the big ideas that come to mind. I just find it so funny. Told every, I said, I blogged about it. I said, listen, y'all should be using Google Chat Spaces with kids. And then everyone said, we're going to use chatbots. It's chatbots. That's not a documented real world skill at the moment. But we know I don't have to project about the future. Everybody communicates in chat rooms in their work now. Said everybody. That's wrong. But so many people do. And so why not give kids a structured, supervised place to do that?
And I would just affirm, at least for me, in every single job I've had and graduating from college, I've used either
Okay.
Google Chats or I've used Slack
Yeah.
or some iteration of that. So I would just say, at least for me, that is absolutely true. And yeah, if I could also just entertain the question for a second, I think one of my favorite things just post my teaching career, if I was back tomorrow in a classroom, probably what I would do is just get more creative with like some of my assessments, because I know that naturally when you're a teacher, your bandwidth is low. You can't help but just think like short answer responses,
Right.
essays, or multiple choice, right? Like that's so much of like your assessment lives with one of those. But I think with some of the technology we do have nowadays, like if there was some creative way that I could really invite students to like create a podcast episode or like do perform a podcast episode, create some like visuals using something like auto draw to like create a visual picture and element to describe like they're learning with something. I think there's just so many ways we can get more creative with assessment in particular to just make the process to highlight like what you've learned over the course of a unit, over the course of a lesson, just so much more fun and exciting for kids. And I think that that would be probably one way I'd really
Oh,
try to
yeah, and I don't
elevate
know
that
if
as
school
well.
districts have access to it yet, but Adobe Podcast is fantastic, and it actually uses AI to generate a transcript that you can then edit and delete parts, and it uses AI to improve the sound. And so I don't have the data set behind that, but it's not generating things that I think have been plagiarized. So to me, I look at Adobe Podcast and I say, that's a use of AI that I don't really have any concerns about. Right. So I think you have to evaluate it app by app. But yes, I think
Hmm.
obviously students learn how to write, but at the same time, if you can give them some creative group projects, if you can let them be creative, and then I would say maybe let them do a few things and then choose which of those things, as my cat climbs on my chair behind me, which of those things they want us
Got the kitty
graded.
in the
I
frame.
think really, why not? For sure.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I mean, this has been such an energizing and exciting conversation for me. I'd love to close out by just holding some space for you to share a little bit more. Folks are really interested in connecting with you, learning more about your work. I'm going to obviously link both of the blog posts that we talked about today, because I think there's just so many good nuggets that we only skirted the surface on. So I really highly recommend anybody listening to this check both of them out. I promise you it's worth your time. You're going to walk away with some interesting insights that Tom shares here. You also shared just a plethora of links related to each one of the points that we didn't even really dig into, but just so many examples of the bias and assessment and these pieces that we were alluding to as a part of our conversation. But folks are interested in learning more about your work, connect with you.
So
How would you
thank you
invite
so
them to
much,
do so?
Daniel. And I appreciate your giving me this opportunity both to speak with you today and then to share. So my website is tommullaney.com. Mullaney is spelled Mullaney. Tom E. Mullaney on Twitter. And yes, I still call it Twitter because when Musk was interviewed, he called it Twitter. So stop with this nonsense. And then the other thing I'll say is, I'm a consultant. I just work with school districts. And so if your school district, if you heard this and you're not saying, who is this crazy person? Then, all right, then if you want someone to work with you through AI and building up policies and really critically unpacking and investigating it, reach out to me. I'd love to work with you and collaborate on doing things that benefit students and teachers.
Awesome. Tom,
Thank you,
thank you so much
Daniel.
for your time today.